Well, we've all now had time to digest the Big 12's mulling over private equity, as well as, of course, the Big 12 potentially becoming the All State 12 and rebranding the conference by selling the naming rights. I have tonight for you what I think is, to me, the biggest question that has not been discussed enough about this whole private equity discussion. And for me, I don't just mean this is the biggest thing that hasn't been discussed enough. It is literally the biggest thing in regards to the private equity discussion, I believe, has not gotten near enough run yet. And I do want to credit Matt Brown from Extra Points, who does a great job with not only his writing, but his newsletter for laying out the biggest questions of all. And I think he hit on it. Even then, it was probably too late on in the article, if we're being honest, in terms of what is the most important for the league's future and those most importantly that are making these decisions. Okay. Who is making the decisions for the Big 12 on this? It is the current leadership, presidents, athletic directors, and at the head of the list, Mr. Brett Yormark, obviously the commissioner of the conference. It more or less boils down to how much can those guys be trusted? And that is not for me to suggest that they're untrustworthy based on any information or data that we have so far. You guys know me. I'm incredibly high on Brett Yormark and what he has done for the conference. I think he has done a tremendous job so far, especially nailing down the big picture things. I trust, obviously, that he has a previous working relationship with CVC, who is the private equity partner that they've been having discussions with. And I understand that Brett Yormark comes from a world where he has had to have more discussions with those types of folks than most in the college sports world. But there are forces at play here that I think could motivate and subconsciously motivate the leadership in the Big 12 that will be mulling this decision over more so than they would even want to admit or be able to admit. It could be things happening at a subconscious level that could be dangerous long-term for the league. So that is where I want to start tonight. Breaking down this trust equation. Can we trust the Big 12 leadership in making this sort of decision? In the end, you guys know I've already, in essence, signed off. They've gotten my seal of approval on private equity. If that is something they deem appropriate and the best way to move forward, I'm for it. I'll get on board. But I do think we should raise this question. Are there factors at play here that could lead to a bad decision being made? Also, we have some more details just in general about what is happening with private equity and the naming rights, timeline, etc. I know Brett McMurphy went on a radio show, I think it was in Salt Lake City, and said that the Big 12 actually didn't really want the naming rights story getting out. I have not had time to listen to that entire interview, but I did see the headline and put that on my list. Unfortunately, I saw it like 10 minutes before I was coming on to do this show live with you. So I feel like that's another potentially important tidbit. I also want to dive into the psyche of Big 12 fans, because one of the other things that has been the fallout of this whole private equity news cycle is the amount of people not only cracking jokes at the Big 12's expense, but really lobbing blame at the Big 12's expense for like greed and what this is going to do to college football, and ultimately how this will be such a horrible, terrible, bad thing if the Big 12 does it. And you know, if you watched the live show on Thursday, for my instant reaction to all this, that was really grating to me. Like, I was getting very tired of it. It was annoying to see that sentiment out there. And I think I've uncovered a big piece of why. Not only a big piece of why we see the reaction that we do from the rest of the college football world, but why then the counter reaction from Big 12 fans is to feel the way that we feel. And everybody comes by it pretty honestly. It's kind of just a class warfare type of story. And warfare is too strong of a word, but I use it to just illustrate the point that I'm making. You have two different classes of the college football world butting heads there. I'm not doing it high enough into the camera. There we go. There's your two classes of the college football world butting heads. We've got a Coach Prime story. It is so hard to talk about Coach Prime in Colorado, man, because every time that Coach Prime is in the news, every time there's a story about him, I just feel like it is impossible to have an in good faith discussion about it. And the latest story is just another one of those. I was checking on some of the Facebook reaction to that story, particularly on, like, I went to Heartland College Sports because they have such a huge Facebook following. And I was just like, man, I can only imagine what the discussion on this story about Coach Prime and a Lil Wayne concert, it pretty much is a Mad Lib at this point with Colorado. Like, remember the Mad Libs back in the day where we just have a fill in the blank? I used to do those a lot as a kid. That was a way that my mom would try to entertain us. It would be like a sentence and there would just be fill in the blank pieces of it. So it'd be like, Coach Prime forced players at Colorado to blank at a concert with blank. I don't know. And they did it all in the name of blank. And in this case, it is Coach Prime apparently forced players to go to a concert to support Shedeur Sanders while watching them open for Lil Wayne. So it's like, can we trust this? Can we believe this? Does it matter? To me, it's just so emblematic of the Coach Prime discussion at large. And if we have time, hey, I will talk some football with you guys. You respond so much better in terms of the numbers on the videos to the realignment, big picture sort of stuff here. But we did get college football lines from Circa Sports out that have the games of the year, the college football games of the year. And we had around 10 that came from the Big 12 conference. So we have some early betting lines if you do want to talk some actual football. You guys know how you can be a part of the conversation and how you can lead me to where you want to go. Click the $ below the chat box to attach a donation to your chat. Creates a super chat, which will pin it in a separate column for me. Guarantees that it makes the show. And that is also just a great way to support the channel. Couldn't do it without all of you guys who do support the channel that way. I appreciate it immensely. So thank you so much, everybody who is able to do that. If you're not, it is totally cool. If you could just give me one click and like the video, that is also an awesome way to support the channel. All the likes help. Leaving comments throughout the video helps. And then leaving comments underneath the video in that comment section, that definitely helps a lot too. And if you are not catching it live, John-Kurtz-4 is a great way to contribute to the channel as well on Venmo, John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. And if you do that, like my guy Clint did, you will be a part of the show as well, because I will lead off the next show with your question or comment from Venmo. And that is where we start here with Clint, who says, and thank you as always, Clint, for your support, my friend. Clint says, risks with private equity. Winning games is one of the most glaring. It equals added pressure. That's a pretty good point too, Clint, that did not get broken down the other day. You are going to have to win games. Like, you need to win games, and you can't let this all be for naught. If you're going to make this $1 billion investment and give up to 20% of your future earnings, or whatever combination of assets it's going to be that you give up as a part of this 20%, yeah, you're going to have to deliver on it by winning football games, which therefore raises the profile of the conference. That is one of the things that to me is like most frustrating and toughest things about being a Big 12 fan or an ACC fan that's not like Florida State or Clemson right now. Florida State, Clemson, or North Carolina, I suppose, is that you feel like your life is on the line with every single game. Like, people have said for a long time, if you're watching a game and it's your significant other or it's friends or family that would be looking at you and how you're reacting so viscerally to a game and the outcome and all that, people could very easily say, man, like, it's not the end of the world. Like, just chill out. It's not life and death. Well, at this point, it really is almost life and death. It feels like life and death, like your school's life and death is on the line. School's life is on the line. You guys get the idea here, right? Like, your mortality as a football program is seemingly being threatened at all times because you have to keep winning, to keep raising your profile, to give yourself the best shot at making it into whatever the next iteration of this sport is going to be. And this would be another added element of pressure. If you were to just say, hey, we'll lie down, we'll take it as a minor league, we're not going to do the full $22 million revenue sharing, we're not going to go down the private equity road, you just kick that to the side and say, we're not about to open that can of worms, we will just be the minor leagues. well, then that pressure goes away a little bit because you're no longer like fighting this battle to stay relevant enough to be toward the top. So that would actually alleviate some of the pressure, but you'd be doing so just by giving up. Well, you continue to fight, which is very much what Brett Yormark has signaled that this conference is going to do. You continue to fight, you're going to continue to get pressure like that. And I think that's such a good point, Clint. If now you have a private equity firm in here expecting ROI, expecting a return on their investment, and they own 20% of your assets or whatever they would get as part of your conference, you better start winning games. You better be raising the profile of the conference. You better be raising the brand value of schools in your conference by doing it. Clint goes on to say no losses to Tulane, Wyoming, North Texas, etc. Yeah, points out the Mac Rhodes quote, we have to get better at football. And Clint says, I'll add, or we might look silly. Yeah, not just look silly, but then you're going to be up you-know-what creek without a paddle if you don't have the money to give back the ROI to CVC or whoever it's going to be that invests this $800 million to $1 billion in you. So Clint says, much watch TV. Everyone will be watching. This is intense. Yeah, it's intense, man. It's intense. I already feel it as a Big 12 fan and just a fan of a school within the conference. I feel it all the time watching games now. It has changed a lot since 2021. That's what it was. Obviously, the line of demarcation for the Big 12 was when Texas and Oklahoma left. Completely changed the trajectory of where you're going with the conference. That made life that much more stressful for everybody involved in the league. And that will just continue even more here because I wanted to, I was going to bring up a part of what Matt Brown had said. Again, Matt Brown with Extra Points did a really good job with all of this. And he says there are two different, private equity firms don't buy into anything as charity. They want to eventually sell that asset. But since nobody has sold an equity stake in a college athletic conference before, we don't really know what sort of schedule a liquidity event might take. Will a private equity firm be patient enough to potentially wait 2 media rights contracts before cashing out? Will they look to grow revenue and slash expenses quickly enough to get in and out in under 5 years? How will schools manage their desire to maybe work to grow at a different timetable than their investors? These are all good questions. Hopefully, Brett Yormark will be getting a good idea as to what the answers are to those. But if they aren't going to be patient, if they do want to do this thing within 5 years, I would not suggest getting into bed with them if that is the route that they want to go, because I think this will take time. Even if things go as well as possible and you start winning a bunch of games, I think it will still take a lot of time for this to develop, for brands to develop, for rivalries to develop, and the league to elevate its profile. But if you do get stuck in a situation like that, then there will be furious pressure for teams to be winning. There will be furious pressure for TCU to emerge again like they did a couple of years ago and make the national championship game. There will be tons of pressure on these schools to make that happen. And yeah, you would not want to be coughing up the bad non-con losses anymore. Remember the conversations we were having like a month into the season last year? It was about all the, it's the South Alabama type losses of the world that the Big 12 was taking at the hands of some teams that they should not be losing to last year. There was a lot of that going on. You're going to want to avoid that once you get in bed with private equity here. There also is, of course, the whole aspect of, and I think this was such a good point raised as well by Matt Brown, but the point of, hey, there are two potential value propositions to investors, which is potentially a problem since CVC doesn't actually care about conference titles or APR or university marketing goals. They want to make money. So what happens when schools invest their private equity money into winning or any other institutional goals, but that doesn't help the private equity company improve their bottom line? AKA, what happens if you take that money, and this is in essence what will happen, what happens if you take that money, pay players, hire great coaches, win a Big 12 title, and still don't improve revenue enough? Will those wins be worth the painful cuts that come later? I think that's a fair point to raise, right? What if school, because we know the problem with Big 12 schools is not that they can't win or don't punch above their weight class. It's that they don't have the brand value that a lot of these other schools do. Schools that consistently underperform, certainly do not perform at the level of a lot of Big 12 programs. If they're not doing that, but they still have the brand value, they're okay in the new world of college football, and they're still going to continue to make more and more money. What if the Big 12 is going to get stuck in, hey, this money helps us all compete better? We'll have more TCU type situations. Cincinnati can make the college football playoff, whoever that's going to be now. You know, you get some teams there and doing some damage, but yet we're still not elevating the actual value of the conference enough because there's not enough brand value built in, even though we win. That is another risk that is certainly there. And I think it kind of goes along with what you are saying to tie this all the way back to Clint and his comment here. You'd better win because that is the best and perhaps only way at this point for the Big 12 to grow brands is to win and then win games in the playoff, like win at the ultimate high level when everybody is watching and you have the world's attention. But even that may not be enough. I mean, there's a chance that even that may not be enough. So all of this will be very, very intense to watch. There is no doubt about that. Very, very intense to watch. So, Clint, I appreciate your comment, my friend. I thought that was very poignant and a great way to kick off the show and get into kind of the themes of the day here on the show. Let's check in with Snake. Appreciate you, my friend. I saw your kind words earlier on in the chat as well. Appreciate you. Snake says, let's talk football. Why will UCF win the Big 12? Well, Snake, you know that I'm very high on the long-term potential of UCF, and I like what UCF has a lot right now. I mean, Harvey at running back, being able to retain him was huge. KJ Jefferson is a phenomenal player. You've got top 30 recruiting class and portal class coming in, and Gus Malzahn is a legit coach. I mean, that's a guy that did it at the highest level in the SEC to the tune of winning basically as much as you possibly could there, right? Getting within a whisker of a national championship. That guy knows what he's doing. And assuming that they get better luck with quarterback health this year, I absolutely think UCF can be very competitive. They don't get as much run in that like top tier of Big 12 teams. I think some of it is a little trepidation after seeing how last year went. And I'll admit, like, I expected a little more out of UCF last year, but I understand the caveat that comes with it, that injury issues certainly did hamper them there. So I will just say I'm a little bit more on the cautious side of the optimism for this upcoming year. But I mean, I certainly think they'll be like a 7-9 win team. The caution is applied when I talk about Big 12 championship aspirations, which is what you're talking about here, Snake. Why will UCF win the Big 12? If it makes you feel any better, you might want to go check out Heartland College Sports, because I know they did an interview with Andy Staples of On3 within the past week, and he said he would definitely buy stock long-term in UCF and was high on the Knights there. And to tie again this back into the original discussion, Snake, if we are talking about schools that could build a brand over the next 5 to 10 years with a lot of winning, with the area that they are geographically located in, giving them probably a higher ceiling when it comes to recruiting. And just the fact that they're like a young program in the grand scheme of things here, like UCF has a real brand building opportunity. They definitely do. I think they would have one of the bigger brand building opportunities probably in the league. So UCF can definitely be a force here and a factor in what we are doing. Gary, what's up, Gary? Appreciate you, Gary. Thank you for your support. I see Gary's comment here. I compare conference naming to bowl game naming. It was going to be the end of college bowls. There was complaining or teasing in the beginning, but which bowl doesn't have a title sponsor? Gary, I like this because there was a line in the article I pulled from our friend John Wilner, where he quoted Navigate, which is a firm that did a lot of research here on what the Big 12 is trying to do, particularly with the naming rights aspect of this and how much it's actually worth. That was the thesis of the article, is kind of like, what is this actually worth, naming rights for a conference, and how do you calculate that? And one thing that Navigate, this firm, said was, quote, "We have found that with stadium naming rights and jersey patches, there has been initial blowback about the sanctity being tarnished, but then the outrage subsides." So yeah, stadium naming rights. You know, I mean, they were talking about stuff like, hey, like I'm in Kansas City, right? I remember when they did, it's like GEHA Arrowhead Stadium. Like GEHA is the sponsor associated with it now. And, you know, people get upset and up in arms and you're ruining the sanctity of all this. And then, yeah, people just can't stay mad about something like that for long enough and it fades and you kind of forget about it. Now, it maybe has some more staying power when you're literally changing the name of the conference. And technically you would be required or supposed to, I guess, if you're doing it right, saying All-State 12 all the time instead of just Big 12. It's a step further for sure, but I would imagine that the same principle probably does apply there too. It's certainly not going to be the end of everything. I highly doubt that there is any number of any substantial number of people that will stop watching just because they're like, well, they changed the name of the conference. Like if your school is still on, and Gary, I appreciate it, and thank you for your support of the channel. If your school is still on, you're going to watch the game, regardless of whether the conference is called the Big 12, the All-State 12, whatever. You're going to still watch your team. People will get over it. I do believe that. Now, whether or not you think it's kind of an embarrassing look, or, you know, you're going to take more jokes about it. That stuff is definitely true. But like these athletic directors are looking at their budgets right now. Like, dude, I got to find $22 million somewhere. $3 million is not a crazy, crazy chunk of it, but it's certainly a nice start. Like we might as well start there and get some help where we possibly can. I mean, that is the reality of the situation that they're in. Like, you know, hey, ideally you need $2,500 to pay your mortgage this month and you're broke and somebody offers you $300. Are you going to turn down the $300 and say, well, no, I can't do that because it's not going to cover everything? Like, no, you take the $300 because you're trying to work toward getting the $2,500 that you need to pay your mortgage that month. Like you'll take some of it. And yes, I think the idea is like, hey, you guys are all addicted to this enough. You're still going to watch. You will definitely still watch. Let's check in with Papa Bravo real quick here. Papa Bravo, appreciate your support of the channel. Thank you for being here. Papa Bravo says, I cast my vote for the Trojan ENZ Big 12 conference. Might as well perform a public service while we're at it. Just imagine the ad slogans. I assume that is the condom brand, right? That's what you're talking about here, Trojan. I don't know this ENZ thing that's going on there, but all right. So we're gonna push Trojan condoms. I can remember going to, like, as a kid, I went to Warped Tour like every year growing up, and when you would show up there, they'd just be like handing out condoms, trying to spread the greater good. I guess you could just be doing that at the Big 12 championship game, right? You can have people there at the door doing that. I imagine there's a lot of creativity that could go on with the mascot that you have hanging out there if you were to do that. So I feel you, Papa Bravo. Let's look out for our kids, okay? Look out for the kids and make sure that we don't get too many other kids that they may not be ready to have yet. I think it's a great plan. It's a great plan, Papa Bravo. That's solid. The Big 12. I think the Big 12. That's what the Big 12 is here for, right? Josh Pate calls it America's Conference. It's going to be America's Conference for the kids because they are now the Trojan ENZ ends. Trojan ends the Trojan Conference. The Trojan Conference, actually, that sounds kind of badass. Like, that's awesome. The Trojan Conference. And you can do 300 imagery, like the movie 300. I think there's a lot of potential with that, Papa Bravo. Well, let's put a pin in that one, everybody. Let's put a pin in that one and remember it as we continue to go down this road. Let me get to a couple news and notes on everything happening with the naming rights and private equity really quick before I tell you about the biggest question raised by Matt Brown that I think is, to me, the most important thing in all of this. How much can you trust the leadership that is making this decision? But Pete Thamel said, and by the way, if you have questions or comments in the meantime, you can click the $ below the chat box. We'll attach a donation to your chat and make it a super chat, guarantees that you get on the channel here tonight. Appreciate all of you guys who are able to support that way. It is very, very much appreciated. Pete Thamel says, the conference, which has explored this is in regards to the naming rights. The Big 12, which has explored this option for the past 6 months. All right, this has been going on for a long time. 6 months. And we know from what Brett McMurphy said on a radio show in Salt Lake that the Big 12 apparently didn't want this getting out. So this has been in the works for a while. 6 months. They've had in-depth discussions, and a decision is expected in the upcoming months. A deal could mean millions of dollars annually for the conference's member schools. That's just a little bit of a timeline. I know in one of the stories, it must have been McMurphy's, since he was the one that really broke that. He had said something about it was unclear. I'm paraphrasing here, but like unclear whether or not it could be in place in time for 2024 because there's so much branding, like logos you think about everywhere, that all the branding would go for the conference. There's so much of that has to be worked out, and it would be really tough to just do that last minute for the league. So I would expect that, that could be a tight turnaround. In terms of private equity, Thamel says, and remember Pete Thamel, I mean, top of the heap to me in terms of college football reporters right now. He and like Dellinger, maybe 1A, 1B. He said sources, however, caution that the private equity pieces include some skeptics, especially among university presidents. Regardless, there is a clear desire to boost revenue in the Big 12 in the near future. We've heard this before, but just to emphasize and drive the point home more, it's the university presidents that will be tough to convince here. And it was the university presidents that ultimately derailed the Pac-12's flirtation with private equity in 2018. Not sure if you associate that as a good thing or a bad thing when it comes to the Big 12, because generally you'd want to be on the opposite side of whatever decision the Pac-12 presidents were making about college athletics. They were woefully out of touch, and that was proven time and time again. But the Pac-12 apparently, and I was looking at this today, it was John Canzano who had one of these reports. He reported that the Pac-12 had a $1 billion deal on the table with private equity and opted not to go for it. That was then taken, and I saw people spinning it and dividing it by the number of teams in the conference and saying, all right, well, Big 12 teams are being valued at about half of what, whatever. You can do that if you want to really parse through all the details there. But that was apparently what the Pac-12 had on the table. University presidents shot it down, and university presidents are the threat to this not happening to the Big 12 right now. One other quote here from a Big 12 source that I want to read to you from Pete Thamel's reporting. He says, every commercial opportunity the commissioner is bringing is a way to close the financial gap between the Big 12 and the SEC. A Big 12 source said, the number one priority of the Big 12 is maintaining competitiveness, and these opportunities potentially help. The main reason that I read you that is just to, again, underscore like everything we've been hearing publicly from Yormark and his lieutenants, the athletic directors, over the last 4, 5, 6 months has been about like not backing down. We need to invest in football. We're going to go do this thing and swing as hard as we possibly can. Because Mac Rhodes was saying on 365 Sports, look, we got to get better at football. I know there's a lot of talk about basketball, how good we are there. We got to get better at football. Brett Yormark says we're open for business, which people speculated realignment-wise there. Obviously, what it's really meant is trying to open up any and every financial opportunity that they can here. And if you're going to go down naming rights, if you're going to go down private equity, you clearly are not in a mood to back down to the Big Ten and the SEC and just bow down and say, hey, we'll be the minor league right now. Like, that is not the attitude from anybody. And it's coming out with sources that are talking to people. It's coming out when athletic directors do interviews. It's coming out when Brett Yormark does interviews. So I just wanted to drive that point home. A few details from John Wilner about his discussions with Navigate. Navigate's internal discussions resulted in a range of informal estimates. So Navigate estimated the naming rights could be worth $30 million to $60 million per year. And as Wilner points out, the midpoint $45 million equates to about $3 million per school per year. If you were paying attention to the Brett McMurphy report, it said 30 to 50, but there was a note that there was a financial institution they had been discussing a deal with as well, who potentially would pay more money. So Allstate seemed to be the favorite and the leader, but there was another financial institution that was maybe on the hook for more. So that's why I bring up that $30 to $60 million estimate there. Quote, it's a big number and a big range because of that immature market, and it depends on the other inventory included. This is a source within Navigate. Are there courtside rotational signs or other assets in the venues? Basically, are they getting an All-State logo thrown around all over the place, like where a Big 12 logo would be right now? Is media advertising baked into the football inventory? Okay, interesting question there. Like, do they get commercials built into this with the football inventory on TV just by taking part in this deal? Is the partner integrated into the championships in other ways? What about hospitality? So some questions brought up there about what else would be included and how much extra value could you create with that. Also, a lot of the tone of this article was just like about how this is kind of uncharted territory. Nobody knows 100% how to quantify this or how exactly to price this because we haven't really seen anybody do it. So the Big 12 would be kind of testing the waters as far as that goes and what you can pull off charging for something like this. I did think this was interesting because I know there was discussion about this. I never worried about this as much as some, but Navigate basically tells John Wilner the risk to the Big 12's reputation is likely limited. The conference is just 30 years old. Brett Yormark calls it a mature startup, and its biggest football brands, Texas and Oklahoma, are joining the SEC this summer. Quote, they would be giving up some brand equity, but the risk is fairly low, Nelson said. Again, a source there from Navigate. And again, the quote I read earlier, we have found that with stadium rights and jersey patches, there's been initial blowback about the sanctity being tarnished, but then the outrage subsides. So yeah, I would tend to agree with that. The Big 12 doesn't have a ton to lose with the naming rights piece. I'm not so bothered by that. We'll get over the jokes. It'll be fine. The Big 12 has taken Twitter jokes from everybody forever. You got to learn to kind of get over it as much as you possibly can there. So I'm not going to lose a ton of sleep. Over all of that. I see Brett. I'm laughing at this, Brett. You got my attention with this. Brett, the Trojan War is going to be a Big Ten rivalry now. USC versus Michigan State. Okay. All right. Well, then I guess we can save that idea for the Big Ten. Someone get this to the biggest Big Ten channel you can find. Tell Greg. I guess we'll tell Greg Flugar. Like, hey, when the Big Ten wants to sell its naming rights, they can be the Trojan Conference, and then they'll have the ultimate Trojan battle there between USC and Michigan State. That's funny. Appreciate you, man. Eddie Lozano, San Antonio Real Estate. What's up, Eddie? Thank you for being here, Eddie. Eddie says, hi, buddy. I am 100% behind the Big 12 and the commissioner's initiatives to make more money. Tradition has left the building a long time ago. This is the reality in today's college sports. That is correct, Eddie. That is correct. This is why Eddie's the man. If you need a real estate agent in San Antonio, contact Eddie Lozano. Eddie Lozano, San Antonio Real Estate. Thank you, sir. Yeah, Big 12 fans, and I have a whole monologue planned on this later. I talked about it a little bit on 365 Sports. If you caught that interview, really appreciate those guys having me on Friday. I think Big 12 fans, we are so much more conditioned to that being the reality of college sports because we know exactly what's happened to everybody in this league since 2021. We understand what has happened. Nothing is sacred in college athletics anymore. Pac-12 fans actually know it more so than Big 12 fans. Like Washington State and Oregon State fans particularly do because they got the ultimate screw job in all this. Didn't quite happen to Big 12 fans. It did. It did happen to the Pac-12. But we're in a different level. Big Ten and SEC fans, it's like, hey, they're aware of this, but they don't really feel it. Okay? So it just rolls off a little bit more. And I think that's kind of painted how everybody has reacted to this story in a lot of ways. So, Eddie, I will dive more into that in a minute, but it's a really good point you make, and I appreciate immensely your support of the channel. And you also, I will play off Eddie a little bit here to say, Eddie says, hey, I trust what the commissioners are doing to make money here. And if you do trust what the commissioners are trying to do to make money here, what the commissioner and the athletic directors, I should say, are doing to try and make money here, you are in a pretty good spot. Because to me, I guess I'll start this way by saying the biggest question mark about all this with private equity to me is, how much can you really trust the leadership involved here? And that may seem simple. That may seem very rudimentary and elementary in making a decision of this kind of magnitude. But I think it matters, and I think it matters from this standpoint. And Matt Brown points this out in his Extra Points newsletter. He says, according to the American Council on Education, the average university president has only been at their current school for 5.9 years, down from 8.5 years in 2008. So think about that. In the last decade and a half, the average university president is now spending 2.5 less years at their current job, to the point where it's only a 6-year job. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters because these are decisions that will affect the league for a long time. The private equity thing, it was discussed in the article that broke the story from Dennis Dodd. It was discussed as to whether or not private equity like CVC would require the Big 12 to more or less guarantee that they would have a grant of rights beyond just 2031, beyond the TV contract that they have right now, that they would need some sort of assurance like, hey, you guys are going to stick together for longer than just 2031, right? Like, we need assurances of that. That tells you that they seem to be thinking this will be a really long-term thing. This is a very long-term play. And so if you are a university president and you're sitting there saying, well, average lifespan of anybody in my spot's only 6 years, who knows where I'm going to be 3 or 4 years from now? Say you've already been in the job for a couple of years. Like, this is no longer just like a lifer kind of job for me. If I'm here when the bill comes, that's future me's problem, but I may not be here. That may not be future me's problem. That'll land on somebody else. And that's got to be your fear here. And I know there's been speculation about Brett Yormark, not from anybody that has like credible information, but just people who look at Brett Yormark. If you're a John Canzano type and you see sleazy used car salesman Brett Yormark, then you'd be looking at this and saying, well, how can you trust that Yormark is going to be here? Like, he wants the immediate gain of whatever is going to come from taking the $1 billion, however much more that helps your conference, take some short-term gains, which very well could happen from that. And then by the time the bill really comes, he'll be gone. What I mentioned earlier in the show, the point that Matt Brown raised, like, hey, what if you have all these schools in the Big 12 that are really competitive, just not great brands? What if they do win? They do win more. They do stay competitive with the Big 10 and the SEC, but they still don't have the brand power to increase the TV deal enough. Well, private equity is still going to be sitting there like, hey, we got to get our money somehow. You're going to be in a lot of trouble. And maybe it's Brett Yormark like takes the glory here over the next couple of years of, man, look at how much better we're able to compete. We're not backing down. We're fighting the fight. We're fighting the good fight here. This is a conference that survived. We plucked from the Pac-12 when it died. I made the genius move with the TV contract. Now I'm breaking ground with private equity. And we're winning in the short term, man. This is looking great. And then he leaves for the next big venture, whatever that's going to be. There's a guy that's run NASCAR. There's a guy that's run the Nets. Any number of jobs out there, I'm sure people would speculate about things that could pull him away. And then what would you do? Now you've already entered this decision, and you've got the guy who was in charge of it all gone. Maybe some of those university presidents are now gone if they're all leaving in such a short time period, not sticking around. And same with the athletic directors. You know, we see a lot of movement of athletic directors here too. We had a couple just within the last week that moved in Power 5 athletics. Whether or not that is the thinking of these people, like outwardly, that is just an inherent risk that is going to be there. Like, your athletic director may not be thinking about it right now, leaving for another job or whatever it might be, but that opportunity could still very well come to them because that's the world that we live in now. There's a ton of movement. People are moving up and down the food chain, especially with the disparity in dollars and resources at these places. If a Big 10 or an SEC job comes open and they're pursuing you, it's hard to say no. It would just be in a lot of ways bad business for some of these guys to say no, and then they're not going to be on the hook for the consequences of this. So like literally everybody that makes the decision on this thing, whenever that decision comes on private equity, could be gone when the bill comes. And that is a definite concern. And I'm not shied away from that. Well, I have said this whole time, I am generally a lean toward, hey, I trust Yormark. If he has got this all lined up and he thinks it is a smart decision and everybody in the conference thinks it's a smart decision, I'm on board with it. I appreciate the fight. I appreciate not laying down and dying for the SEC and Big Ten. Okay. Well, that is my stance and my position. I recognize that there are a world of concerns here and a lot of things that we just don't know. And we really need probably some good reporting, and or we may just not find out some of the answers on the details, devil in the details on all this, the details of how this agreement would work out with private equity to truly know just how much of a risk it is. But no matter what, there's going to be some risk, and some of that risk is the people that make this decision now may either realize or just not know it yet, or subconsciously be motivated by the fact that they would be taking on a lesser risk because they're not as likely to be around. That is a very valid point and a valid question raised. This is the rest of what Matt Brown wrote in Extra Points. He said, selling a 20% equity in your league's future media rights and potentially other assets is not a small decision. But the positive headlines and biggest benefits from that decision are more likely to be front-loaded. What happens if in 4 years the deal looks increasingly wrong-headed, but the commissioner and half the ADs and presidents in the conference have left? Who gets the blame? What kind of flexibility will the new leaders have to address those problems? And what tools or norms are out there to not incentivize leadership to take a cash grab without sticking around to clean up the mess? Lots of good questions. I mean, to start and work backwards on that, what tools or norms are out there to not incentivize leadership to take a cash grab and not stick around to clean up the mess? I mean, basically, are there any incentives out there to keep people from thinking exactly how I just outlined they could potentially be thinking here? Hey, less risk for me personally than there is for whatever my school is that I'm at right now because I could be gone. Are there incentives? I don't know. I mean, I have no idea how you would do that. No idea how you would incentivize people to stick that out. You'd like to think, right? We'd all love to think, hey, I know I made this massive decision for the university and, I'm part of this huge thing for the conference. I should stick this out. This is a big thing that I put the conference, school, athletic department in. I should stick this out. But to tie into the point that I will make later on, Big 12 fans, we are not stupid. We know nobody thinks like this. That's not how it works. Nobody's doing anything for the greater good of anybody other than themselves and their pocketbooks. It's the greater good of the wallet. That's basically the college sports world right now. So very unlikely that you would get somebody acting in that kind of manner. So this does have to be raised as a legitimate question. I don't think Brett Yormark is I don't think he is somebody that is out there to just purposefully be here for a short time, completely inflate himself, and then leave. I don't think that. I don't think the worst of him, like some really assume based on his personality and resume and just his whole general vibe and aura. I don't. I give him certainly some benefit of the doubt with that. And regardless of whether he is or not, he's already done enough good by keeping the conference alive and taking the four corners and watching the Pac-12 be the first to fold. He's done enough good to earn plenty of benefit of the doubt from me, period. But I give him some benefit of the doubt from that anyway. However, that doesn't reduce the risk that there's just going to be a big job in sports that will come chase after him. I mean, I know Dan Hurley didn't leave, but everybody kind of thought like, all right, well, I mean, Kentucky couldn't even really sniff that. Like Dan Hurley's going to be there forever. And then 2 months later, here come the Lakers, and you're thrown into a position where UConn fans really had to squirm. Like a job could come open that would very much tempt Brett Yormark or be a bad business decision for him to not go. And it may not have been his intention, but at a certain point that job comes and you got to be like, well, damn, I mean, sorry, Big 12, I got to do this. That's a risk that you run with this. 100%. It is a risk that you run with this. And I did want to be upfront and honest and just acknowledge that because I do think it is perfectly fair to acknowledge it. So I thought Matt Brown did a good job of being fair. He wasn't saying like, hey, this is outright a terrible decision. He was just raising points along the way. Like, these are things we need to know. These are things that will be a risk, like no matter what happens, and it will be fascinating to watch and see. And I think he's right about all that. right, if you want to be a part of the show, got about 15 minutes left. You can click the $ below the chat box in order to do so. You do that, creates a super chat, puts it in a separate column for me, and ensures that you will make it on the show tonight. Plus, just supporting the channel and supporting the work that I do to bring you Big 12 conference realignment, college football, college basketball content on a regular basis here on this channel. Couldn't do it without all of you guys, and I genuinely appreciate your support. If you want to give me a like, that would also really help. Totally free way to support the channel. Also, much appreciate that. Keep the comments coming. And then comment below the video after it's done, or if you're watching after the fact. John-Kurtz-4 if you want to contribute on Venmo as well. If you are not watching live, and I will kick off the show like I did today with Clint's comment, with your comment on the next show. Alan checks in. What's up, Alan? Alan says, John, trust Brett. The Big 12 will be okay. And the game day experience and pride on a Big 12 campus is second to none. The Big 10 and SEC will find that their money won't buy as many wins as thought. Rock Chalk Jayhawk Allen. Well, I definitely agree with you about the game day experience and pride. That's what we keep trying to tell Utah fans, right? I understand it's not as fun from a pure travel standpoint in terms of amenities, attractions, etc., to swap out Palo Alto and LA and come to, I'm not even going to single anybody out, all these schools in the truck stop conference as you perceive it. I get that, but you are getting a much better game day environment. You're getting better college towns. You're getting a better true taste for what college football actually is. I mean, to go back to the Josh Pate America's Conference thing, the Big 12 is America's Conference because of just that. You have a lot of great experiences and great environments and atmospheres on all of these campuses across the Big 12. Couldn't agree more. And it may not buy the Big 10 and SEC as many wins as they think. Again, to me, Alan, the question will be, what will that do to the Big 12's ultimate brand value over time? How much time would it take to really increase the brand value of the Big 12's football brands in particular if you are winning more of those games? And where it will have to start, no matter what, where it will have to start is winning some games in the playoff. I'm not saying that you got to go win the whole thing, but you can't just be one and done. You're champion. The next couple of years will get a bye, which is going to make that first game a little bit tougher than it would be if, say, you were like a 5 seed as opposed to a 4. But you're going to need to start winning some of those games to earn respect. Ultimately, that's the way that it will have to happen. So I very much hope you're right, Alan. And I hope that it also at the same time increases the brands that the Big 12 has to offer on the football field. And I love, Alan, that you're always, you trust in the league, man. You trust in the league. You love the league. For those that aren't here every single week, Alan, a Kansas fan that was not real happy about the Kansas to the SEC rumors. He wants them to stay in the Big 12. So very, very much pro Big 12. I appreciate you, Alan. Thank you for being here and for your support of the channel as always. This is something that I mentioned on 365 Sports when I made that appearance on Friday. There is so much out there that is really frustrating to watch in terms of the reaction to the Big 12 being involved with private equity and being involved with Allstate and potentially selling off the naming rights to the conference. And I mean, look, it ranges from the jokes to the way over the top, too serious opinions. I'm going to give you a couple of those here to look at just to start off. But in essence, it all boils down to the Big 12 was forced into this position by the SEC and the Big 10 by their greed. And now the Big 12 has to take a lot of the shots from everybody. And I don't love that. I don't love that fact at all. Let me share my screen with you here. Now, as I said, it ranges from the funny, which is, I got a shout out to Simple 5 podcast, the Big 12 looking at giving private equity a massive stake, ruining every other industry it's touched. And of course, we have the Tobias reference there from Arrested Development. Fantastic show. But it might work for us. Where, the first part of that, he's saying, it doesn't work for anybody else, but it might work for us. That's the Big 12 looking at private equity. That's funny. I can at least appreciate that. But it is people cracking jokes, right, at the expense of the Big 12. Then there's the more, I would say, problematic version of this. Like everything else private equity touches, the Big 12 will be destroyed by its own greed. I mean, this is the one that really gets me. The Big 12 will be destroyed by its own greed. Dude, come on. Oh, it's greed that will have destroyed college football at the end of this, or the Big 12 at the end of this. But it is not the greed of that conference. It is not the greed of the Big 12. It is the greed of a couple of parties, the Big 10, the SEC, and Fox and ESPN. It is their greed that will have killed all of this because they have painted the Big 12 in the position to need to go the private equity route to remain even relatively competitive, right? That is the reality. And it's frustrating that not everybody will acknowledge that. But I think you have to remember here, the reason you get some of that from Big Ten, SEC, other college football fans, maybe just more your casual college football fans, is because this is more jarring to them. They have not been forced into a position where they have to consider things like this. They have not had to sit and contemplate their actual mortality as a college football program since 2021, like Big 12 fans have. I think Big 12 fans are just so much more conditioned already to like, dude, tradition's been thrown out the window years ago. Why would we believe in anything being sacred or any tradition or team or conference being sacred because it's for the greater good of the sport or the greater good of the game? We know that's not how it works. This has been completely controlled by greed for years and years. And it manifested itself in the worst ways over the last 3 to 4 years, where we've now lost the Pac-12 and we have two conferences barreling toward just being some sort of super league and completely leaving everybody behind. So if you're a Big 12 fan, you took all the jokes in 2021. You took the Stuart Mandel articles saying that your TV value was only going to be worth like $7 or $8 million per school per year. You took all that stuff. You had to fight for your right to even just feel like you belonged at the table in any way, shape, or form. You've been doing that for a long time. You're in a position where it's like, all right, private equity, we got to hold our nose and do that. I mean, fine. We know what the reality of this whole deal is. Naming rights, we got to be the All-State 12 to get an extra $3 million. Whatever. That's what we have to do. We've been on this road. That is what we have to do. If you're a Big Ten or an SEC fan, it's like, hey, I'm aware that this has been going on. I know that we're taking Texas and Oklahoma, and like I know that conferences are changing and we do have this Power 2 thing, and like, you know, it seems like greed is pretty crazy in the sport, but like who cares? Life's good for me. I'm in the penthouse, you know, I've got the mansion. I know that life is happening outside there, but it's tougher to bother me when I'm on the golden throne in the mansion right now. It just has not been their reality. They're aware of it, but it's not been the reality of the life that they are living. It's something that they read about in the papers. It's not something that they live. Big 12 fans have been living this, man. We have been living this life. So private equity doesn't jar us near as much as it would others. The naming rights do not jar us. The All-State 12 is not as jarring to us because the All-State 12 sounds a hell of a lot better than the Big 12 dead. Because that's what you were facing. It sounds a hell of a lot better than the Big 2. You know, I mean, we talk somewhat derisively about the Pac-2 now with Oregon State and Washington State still hanging out there. You could have like the Big 2 or the Big 4, whoever would have been left behind if the Big 12 had exploded and been left for dead. All-State 12 sounds a lot better than that reality. So even back to, you know, if you want to really extrapolate this back out, you think about Big 12 fans and the life Big 12 fans have been living. I mean, it goes back to when they tried to explore expansion candidates and what? That was 2016, 2015, 2016. It goes back to Dan Beebe and just being such a passive pushover when Nebraska, Missouri, Texas A&M, Colorado left the league once upon a time. Big 12 has been taking these shots forever. It's been pushed around by Texas. That's been the lifestyle. You know that you are not sacred to anybody in this college athletics space, in this college athletics world. So I think that is why you get the the line of demarcation on how that was all perceived when it came out late last week, and then what the reaction was on one side versus the other. So you guys know I'm here to always stick up for your perspective and defend like the life Big 12 fans have lived, because I completely understand it, man. I know it. I've been there, and I get it. David, what's going on, David? David says, please become the Dr. Pepper conference so we can all be a Pepper too. Well, Dr. Pepper, didn't I see that Dr. Pepper is now taken over as the number 2 soda in America? They have surpassed Pepsi. Maybe that's a good omen, David. Maybe that's a good omen. If that means now that the Big 12 is on a trajectory to overtake the Big 10 as the number 2 conference, sign me up. Get me involved with Dr. Pepper. That sounds like a match made in heaven for Brett Yormark in the Big 12. So also, Dr. Pepper just gives me plenty of nostalgia. You know, Dr. Pepper Big 12 championship game. K-State fans online, I know forever, have just called that Big 12 championship game the Dr. Pepper in a fond way. It's a fond moniker being attached to that. So I'm all about Dr. Pepper. Used to drink a ton of Diet Dr. Pepper, not as much anymore these days, but got much love for Dr. Pepper. So David, much love for you as well. Thank you for supporting the channel tonight. And thank you to Nate. Appreciate you, Nate, for popping in here at buzzer beater time. Just a couple minutes left in the show. Nate says, think CVC wants long-term commitment. CVC being the Luxembourg-based private equity company. Because of previous relationship with Yormark, they know how he feels about basketball. What if he leaves to take over for Adam Silver after 2030? All right. I mean, that's exactly the type of thing that I'm talking about here. I don't know how high Brett Yormark's could climb, like how high his star, how bright his star could get in all of this, and to what job that would lead to. But I wouldn't put much of a ceiling on that guy. I mean, it's a crazy resume. Like, he oversaw an unbelievable period of growth for NASCAR. He took the Nets from New Jersey to Brooklyn, and say what you will about what they've done on the court. That made them a much bigger deal in terms of brand value, which is what we're talking about here, right? Then he was working with Jay-Z, and now he has helped the Big 12, this lowly, forgotten conference that's always been in its own way, actually survive and throw a few punches. He's got a pretty crazy resume across the board. And yes, basketball is something that he definitely fancies himself to be great with. That's something. That's something to have on the radar. Look, I have no idea. I have no idea how the NBA would go about who they would be hiring there, and if that's realistic, none. I think that's the type of thing you would have to be thinking about there when we're saying there's a risk that Yormark or one of these athletic directors or many of these athletic directors or presidents could be leaving. With Yormark, it's thinking about jobs like that. What jobs like that could open that would be like, dude, if you got pursued for that, like, you're going to stick around and not be the commissioner of the NBA to be the commissioner of the Big 12. I mean, that'd be the type of thing I feel like you'd have to take. And so you are running some of that risk. I do agree with you, Nate. I think you're right. Like, reading the tea leaves, especially from that article saying CVC was asking about potentially like, hey, can you guys give us assurances beyond 2031? You'll be together as a conference. Does sound like they're viewing this as a very long-term thing. So Matt Brown had raised the point about, what if they want a 5-year ROI here and they're pushing more and more for that? I'm with you. It seems like it's going to be a longer-term type of deal there. So appreciate you, Nate. Thank you for your support of the channel, and thank you for being here, my friend. Okay, couple minutes left. Do we want to talk about these Coach Prime rumors? You know what? We'll table the Coach Prime thing. Someone asked for football early on. I think that was Snake asked for some actual football early on. So let's get you these lines, people. We got Big 12 Game of the Year lines. Big 12 Game of the Year lines. When I say Big 12 Game of the Year lines, Circa out in Vegas put out their lines for their college football games of the year. And there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There were 8 Big 12 games on this list. First that we have UCF and Florida. I talked a lot about this game the other day. I love it. My favorite Big 12 non-con game, if we're not counting K-State, Arizona, because, well, it is technically a non-conference game. I didn't feel it right to actually count it that when we have that discussion. So UCF, Florida. UCF a 6-point dog at Florida. I mean, I guess that's fair. That's fair enough. I think that could change a lot because Florida stands to have a pretty rocky season. Most of the meat of their schedule is later, but they could still lose a couple of games and be like 2-2, 3-2. I forget if it's 4 or 5 games they play before that. They could have a couple losses before they go into that game, and maybe it would change. I would take UCF to cover right now. I'm not thinking much of Florida this year. I think Billy Napier's on his way out, and I do think that UCF's probably an 8-win team this year. Colorado +5 at Nebraska. Colorado, Nebraska. Remember, Joel Klatt says that is a game that will define the season. It's on his list of games that will define the season. Colorado at Nebraska. Hard one to figure out, mainly to me, because I really need to see what Raiola looks like at quarterback. Dylan Raiola, 5-star. They took him from Georgia. I think the world of his potential, obviously, but is he going to be ready that fast? What's Nebraska going to look like at quarterback? And Colorado, I mean, it is about the lines. Are they going to be better up front? Can they protect Shedeur Sanders? So many question marks going into that game. I don't really know. I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, but it's interesting to see where the thought is of everybody right now, based on just pure home field advantage, how much Nebraska is going to want that game. I don't know that Colorado, I would predict that they have the toughness and culture to go in and win that game. But Nebraska's had some real voodoo if they can keep it close. I mean, you don't need me to tell you. Nebraska's had some real voodoo about close games not going their way. Iowa State is a 2-point dog against Iowa. Great game. Iowa, I think, has been one of the most overinflated programs of the last 10 years of college football because of the schedule that they played in the Big Ten West. Iowa State, I think, has a limited ceiling because of Matt Campbell, but a very high floor. I would expect them to be a 7 or 8 win team this year. Sounds about right. That honestly sounds about right to me. It feels like that game is always just kind of knock down, drag out, really close, hard fought, physical, all that. Everything you'd expect when it's Iowa and Iowa State together. So that seems appropriate. This felt a little high for me, man. I got to be honest, even as a K-State guy. K-State is a 9-point favorite against Arizona in that non-con game. I would have thought more like a touchdown, more like a 6 or a 7 there for K-State and Arizona. But I would imagine this is based on Vegas having some of the same questions that I do about Arizona, which is just it was a lot of turnover. I know it wasn't the stars, and they kept a lot of the roster, but there still was a decent amount of turnover. And then Brent Brennan is that ultimate ink blot test of a hire where some people look at it and say, dude, San Jose State's impossible to win at. He did a really good job there, better than anyone has in a long time. And then others look at the overall record and say well, I mean, really, what were the highs were not that high. If he's going to be a guy that's deserving of a job like this, the highs should have been higher. I do have some concerns about Arizona there, but I feel to me, they get enough respect based on Fafita and McMillan almost alone to just say, I would probably have that at more 6 or 7. You're going to notice a theme here. 3 of these last 4 are going to involve Colorado. That means that Colorado is on this list more than any other Big 12 team. That is such a sad state of affairs, but it is the reality. Nobody is on here more than K-State's on here 3 times. And Colorado's on here 4 times. And Kansas is on twice. Colorado 4 times, K-State 3 times, Kansas twice. Those are the only teams that are on here multiple times. Colorado gets 4 of the freaking slots. And it's just because of it's just Coach Prime. That's the Coach Prime effect, right? Vegas is not caring. This is not Vegas does not care about being a really respected college football entity here. They're in it to make money, right? They build the buildings for a reason. Colorado is going to generate interest. It's going to generate money coming in. That's why you're seeing this. So don't send angry letters or whatever. It's just proof of, you want to send angry letters, send it to the general public who cares too much about Coach Prime. And it is fascinating, by the way. I will admit, I'm more interested in Colorado games because of Coach Prime. It works. It is what it is. But K-State, anyways, is a 6-point favorite at Colorado. That's one where I would say I almost feel like that should be higher. K-State -10. I think that's not going to be too much of an issue. I would imagine a decent amount of K-State fans will travel to that game. Colorado is a 5-point dog at Kansas. That's another one that I would have higher. I mean, if Jalen Daniels is healthy in that game, I would take Kansas by 14 at home against Colorado. Colorado's a 6-point dog at Texas Tech. That feels about right. I would predict that Texas Tech would win the game. I don't feel as strongly about them at home as I would Kansas at home. Realizing that Kansas is playing at Arrowhead. Yes, I know. That'll be a game at Arrowhead Stadium, but it's just not a road game. It will not be a road. Can't see a lot of Colorado fans traveling to Arrowhead to watch that one. And then KU State, it's Kansas +8. I'll be honest, man. I would have that probably just slightly under a touchdown too. I'd have K-State the favorite. Don't know that I would have them as that high of a favorite right now. +8 for Kansas going on the road to K-State for the Sunflower Showdown this year. Kansas, shout out to the Jayhawks. They got a former 5-star center from Texas A&M who I believe started every game last year, right? All 12 games. That was filling a hole on the offensive line. Kansas has done a good job addressing some of their needs, like a defensive end, and then on the offensive line this offseason. Look, trolling aside, jokes aside, rivalry aside, man, I mean, you got to be pretty impressed with what Lance Leipold has done. Questions to be answered about Jalen Daniels' health, a new offensive coordinator. Understood. Would acknowledge that, and I wonder how those questions will be answered myself. But they do a lot of things well, and I would expect the Sunflower Showdown to be a pretty close game, assuming that we have 2 healthy quarterbacks. All right, we'll finish things off here with David. Appreciate you, David. David is responding to my Dr. Pepper query there. He says, yep, took over number 2. Big 12 teams up with a power company in Dr. Pepper. David said the Big 12 should get Dr. Pepper as a sponsor. Big 12 would be sitting better if the NCAA collapses and the schools take over basketball rights like they have with football. All right. If the Big 12 would be better off if the NCAA collapses. I don't know, man. I kind of feel like 6 of one, half dozen of the other there, because no matter what, the power broker is Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti. Those two combined, it's the Big Ten and the SEC, and then the TV networks. It's Fox, ESPN, Petitti, and Sankey that have all the power in this. Whether or not the NCAA is there, they are still the ones that will have the biggest voices in the room and the most power, and you're not going to get them to cede anything. It's not like if the NCAA collapsed, you would get to a point like a commissioner of college football who would be looking out for the greater good of everybody. Unfortunately, like the ship has sailed on anything like that. So it's hard for me to get my hopes up too much if that were to happen. I guess what you're saying is with the basketball rights, like the NCAA tournament is not a part of the NCAA, like the college football playoff is not a part of the NCAA. That's its own separate entity. Maybe the thought there is Brett Yormark picks up more influence at the table as you're talking about that sort of thing. I would also just be scared that the Big Ten and SEC would, I know you could scoff at the viability of this, but just take off and try and do their own thing with the basketball tournament. I don't know. I guess David, I would hope that you'd be right. I would hope that you'd be right with that. I'm a little skeptical of it, whether or not the Big 12's ultimate position would change that much if it were to happen. But that would be an interesting variable to track if you did wind up with the NCAA tournament in that sphere, much like the college football playoff. And the NCAA like ceasing to exist, also an interesting one. That's just one I would definitely not have a lot of optimism that it's going to get much better for the Big 12, because then I think it's like, all right, well then there's kind of a power vacuum. NCAA doesn't really have all that much power at all anymore, but there is in some ways a power vacuum. I imagine it would just get sucked up even more by the guys that do have it in the Big Ten and the SEC. But David, great points today. Appreciate you chiming in on the show, and appreciate your support of the channel as always, my friend. All right, guys, I think that's going to wrap it up for me. Please continue to spread the word about the channel. Tell your friends, tell your family, tweet about it, put it on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, wherever you're at on social media. Let people know about it. And like the video on your way out the door. That would be awesome too. I would appreciate that. All of that stuff really, really helps. Do I have anything else for you guys? John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. If you want to support the channel and you're not catching it live, I will kick off the next show with your question or comment there on Venmo if you do choose to contribute that way. And with that, I bid you adieu. Hope you have a great rest of your Sunday evening, a great start to your week, and I will be talking to you all soon. Take care.